Today I'd like to discuss a bit whether AI, artificial intelligence, can become conscious. Now, I'm not really an expert, and I'm not even a geek around AI. I don't use it yet. I think that it has definitely merits, and I think it's the future. And I think we're gonna have to kind of integrate it in our lives in some shape or form. And so I wasn't really thinking too much about it. Um, I was a bit skeptical, let's say. I mean, the thing is, I don't quite understand what it can or cannot do. Um, and so there was a bit of skepticism, or I wouldn't say fear, but um, with all these kind of very disruptive development in human society, I think there needs to be ethical oversight. And yeah, I can only hope that appropriate oversight is there. But this made me think, or there's a particular Joe Rogan Experience podcast that really made me think of what is my main. Again, I don't want to call it fear, but what is my main skepticism around AI? And then I came across that podcast with Thomas Campbell, and at the end of the podcast, I had this kind of sudden realization that okay, yeah, well, one of the fears around AI would be, first of all, that I don't understand it, and I don't understand. I can just only hope that it's not being used for from a bad intent. But then again, you can only hope that. But then suddenly, like probably the biggest fear of that podcast, and I'll explain more, was that AI is being given an inappropriate role, or it's not it's being given something that, from my perspective, it doesn't have, and that's consciousness. I think that attribute is not compatible with AI. But I'll explain. I'll explain also where I came from, and what Tom Campbell's viewpoint is on that, and why this kind of propelled me in a kind of a larger reflection around the topic. So Tom Campbell, I wasn't aware of his work at all. I mean, he's a nuclear physicist, so it's not exactly my expertise. Although I like to dabble into it just to understand more about reality in general. And Tom Campbell also is a declared atheist, so he doesn't believe in God, which is completely fine. It's understandable. But what I really marveled about is that he went really deep, a bit like myself. He's so interested in the nature of reality, and I think he definitely wrote a book. I think he produced so much content. I think I have a lot of respect for him, and I think his book is entitled "My Big Toe." Well, it's a play on words, but TOE, theory of everything. So it's not the toe as attached to your to your foot, but the theory of everything. His big theory of everything. And he went deep into the rabbit hole throughout his life, and I think I think it's really great. And I like to discuss a bit what his model describes, what I agree with, what I tend to disagree with. And I also have the deepest respect for him because, a bit like myself, in my own book that I titled My Perception of Reality, he doesn't try to impose his model on anybody. He explains it, it's very logical, and he just puts it out there for comments, for feedback, and I really do respect that. He just explains it and then leaves it to anybody to either accept it or reject it, and I really admire that. And so I'm gonna have to kind of cite a few of his arguments, of course, right? But he also says that well, you can't be sure 100% of anything, especially if you can't really measure things, right, at the deepest level. So he also doesn't claim that his model is accurate. Again, like it's his model, it's his reality, and then we can discuss how realities overlap. You know, if you disagree with someone, do you just have a small little overlap, but you still interact on that overlap? But yeah, I just wanted to put that. You know, I'm not. I don't want to cite him and leave that unexplained. He's definitely very modest, and he doesn't impose his model and doesn't claim its veracity. So I think that was an important disclaimer. So when I first started to listen to the podcast, I mean, there were so many similarities, and I kind of agreed on everything, you know. And I think the biggest thing we can agree upon is that first and foremost, in his model, consciousness is above anything else. That's also my belief, which I explain in my book, and kind of reflects the principle of mentalism, you know, like in the Kabbalion, and like also a lot of quantum physicists like start to wrap their head around, or at least it's one of the hypotheses that a few models are built upon, you know, that consciousness is primordial and then anything else derives from that. So I think that's a big agreement I have with him on that. He also discusses the limitations of, as he puts it, the intellect. So for me, it's the mind. It's the same thing, right? Or the ego, or whatever word you want to put on it. These are just words. And how it might override more subtle ways to utilize this receiving thing we have as the brain, which for instance the intuition is, you know, it's much more subtle than the intellect. And I think he even calls the intellect kind of a bully. You know, it's a bully in the head, and it just bullies around the intuition, which I feel is actually fairly accurate. You know, you kind of bullying yourself internally, and that there's lack of balance between the intellect and intuition, and how in today's society the intellect is really the primordial thing. You know, you want to study, you want to have a decent job, and it's all about how intelligent you are, IQs, and how many things you can regurgitate in a discussion. That's all intellect, and unfortunately it's completely in disbalance with intuition. And well, from my perspective, which is much more spiritual, I think, than Tom Campbell's, I definitely see that on a higher level as, in today's society, the lack of balance between masculine and feminine, you know, like the mind, the intellect being a masculine type of energy, and the intuition being a feminine one, a receptive one. He also makes the point that intuition cannot be forced, and I think he mentioned a few experiments he was doing, or like, obviously he's been around for a while, and I think he had workshops and he was interacting with people, he did experiments, he still is doing experiments. And so the fact that intuition cannot be forced, I think that's also something that for me resonates very, very deeply. The fact that there's no book. You cannot use the intellect to create intuition. It's not something that you learn. It's something that you acquire, or you kind of rediscover, because it's never lost, when you let go of something like the intellect. So you need to allow it to emerge. It cannot be forced. It cannot be created. It cannot be amplified artificially. also what I discussed with altered states of consciousness, I think also there's also a reflection of that. I explained around psychedelic use, where sometimes you want to force an experience and then you get absolutely nothing, because in that realm, when you're trying to reach towards higher levels of consciousness, there's no forcing allowed, there's no faking allowed, everything is as it is, and there's no shortcut. You have to transform, you have to let go of aspects to actually have that experience. So there's a lot of agreements here. Now, where we started to disagree, and which prompted me into that reflection of AI and consciousness, these are then the arguments when he explains the virtual nature of reality. So again, we agree on the main concept that consciousness is primordial, and then all the rest is derived from that. So virtual is a word you can use. I would use virtual, although I know everything is real. It's all planes, of course, all planes of existence. There are different planes, and the physical world is definitely real. I mean, if I hit my head, it's gonna hurt, right? That there's something real about it. But to me, the reason why I would potentially call it virtual, although I'm not entirely sure I would use the word, but I accept it in a sense. But I would define it as, well, it's virtual because it reflects something deeper. So it is not the ultimate reality. It's the reality that it's the reflection of what happens on a higher plane, like as above, so below. So in that sense, the fact that we are players here on that realm, and that we seek experiences, and to some extent we design these experiences, that makes it somewhat virtual, because death in the physical realm is not ultimate death, and because there's no ultimate death. So in that sense, I would use the word virtual. Now, where we disagree with is, he uses the word virtual because his entire model is predicated on the fact that, well, reality is computed. So it's from his perspective, it's a much more mathematics-based reality. So he discusses possibilities and probabilities. Now, possibilities is anything that can be in this physical world, what is possible. Possible in the sense that, well, you have elements, you have water, you have molecules, you have things that we know exist. And so there's quite a large number, potentially infinite, of ways to do things on Earth. You can combine different things, different atoms, you can create organisms, you have humans, you have trees, and so there's a range of what is possible on this physical plane. But then attached to that, he mentions probabilities, right? So what is the probability that, I think he mentions, you dig a hole in the ground, what's the probability that you find a bone, a dinosaur bone versus whatever, a penny versus nothing? There's a probability associated to that. And so his model of reality is that there is a higher consciousness that's the kind of the player. Human bodies are the avatar. Yeah, I mean I agree with that. For me, part of the higher consciousness. I mean, we have the soul. The soul would be my higher identity, and I would be its physical avatar. I can live with that terminology. That's fine. And then what we experience here is based on probabilities. Now, this is where my reality is completely different, or my perception of reality is somewhat different, because for me, there's way more meaning to it. There's the soul, there's a plan. Of course, this to some extent, the avatar has free will, to some extent, but I mean that's another discussion. But for him, it's really like it's probabilities, and so in his model, because the higher consciousness plays with possibilities in this earthly realm, and possibilities are again like, how can I put atoms together, or put things together, or rearrange things in such a way, still according to the possibilities, to the rule of this physical world, but I can create things. And then ultimately, for him, in his model, the goal, or where is this all going in terms of evolution, it's based on entropy. So entropy is like, I learned that when I had physics in class. Entropy is a measure of disorder of anything. So if you're not familiar with entropy, you can look it up, or I can briefly explain it. So let's assume you have like a cube. It is filled with whatever air, and then there's 10 particles in it. So one possibility is that you have 10 particles equally spaced apart, so they are really completely using all of the space, with as much space in between those 10 particles. Or you can have 10 particles all bunched together in one corner, right? That's two possibilities. So if they're all bunched together in a corner, that's a highly organized way to put those 10 particles together. And so that has low entropy. If they're all apart, maximizing the distance between each other, taking all the space, then you have maximal disorder, because they're completely disordered, right? That's high entropy. So for him, the rule of the model is that, well, higher consciousness tries through physical manifestation to reach a lower entropy. So tries to be organized, more organized, lowering its entropy. And applying that now, because I mean particles and all that stuff, that's very abstract, like where are we going as a society? From a social perspective, lowering the entropy means cooperation, collaboration, right? Particles coming together, doing things in an organized way. And this principle of collaboration, cooperation, ultimately leads to love. So that's the highest expression of that is love. So becoming more loving, as he puts it, would be making choices, like me as a particle, making a choice that lowers the entropy of the system. So that there's a lot of similarities with how I perceive reality. Indeed, it's just that for me, the model is just too cold. Although I believe that divinity in the physical realm can be, one of its manifestation is kind of mathematical beauty, like Fibonacci, Jesus Christ, Fibonacci sequence. Sorry, it's early in the morning. Um, there are aspects that are just mathematically beautiful, but I don't think that mathematics is at the source of it. How the two are intertwined, I mean that it's a deeper reflection, you know. If something reflects something else, to some extent, they have elements in common, or they kind of significantly interlinked. But it's just that I would just frame it differently. To me, it's not about lowering entropy. For me, like consciousness is fundamental to physical, I would say anything physical, like what we observe, the mathematics, the order, that reflects something that is higher, something that transcends mathematics or physics or all these types of explanations. So for me, it's just, it appears to be a bit too cold. Also, where then the disagreement probably becomes a bit stronger as well is that there's, for me in that model, there's too much emphasis on the human avatar. And I agree that humans is a big part of soul reincarnation. But in his model, the main actors in that lowering of entropy is the human. And there's not a whole lot of value attributed in his model, as far as I understand it. Maybe he didn't explain it, he didn't have the time to explain it completely in that podcast, but I feel that there's not enough value attributed to anything that's physical. Plants, animals, other types of consciousness. And that's always been a part of my reflection, you know, how much we cannot consciousness may have a quantity and a quality, right? I don't think we have a proper understanding of how it feels to be an animal, how it feels to be a plant, and how could we ever start comparing those experiences with ours, and what kind of consciousness is involved in it. So I think that's something that would be really great to discuss with him. And related to that, and you know, and as he puts it, you know, and I've reflected on that as well, as related to this question of, well, how much consciousness is in a human, is quantitatively different from an animal and things like that. For me, the thought experiment I put in my book is, you know, if a tree falls in the forest and no human is there to see it or to hear it, did it actually fall, and does it exist at all? Because Tom Campbell also says nothing is rendered, you know, and rendering is really a terminology to that virtual reality. You know, you're rendering something in 3D on your computer, you're rendering a shape. So nothing is rendered if it's not observed by a human. And that's where it becomes a bit too simplistic for me. You know, what is the role of any type of consciousness? For me, everything is conscious. Even stones have a very basic level of consciousness. There's consciousness in every single thing that is manifested, and I think his model doesn't account really for the different qualities and what role that might play overall. And where it also becomes very interesting, his point that, or his emphasis on human avatars as really the crucial elements that bring about the lowering of entropy, is that for him this higher consciousness may be finite, so may not have the computing capacity to hold more than, how many are we, like 9 billion people, 9 billion people might already be at the sweet spot of computing capacity for that higher consciousness. Although he also discussed alternate virtual realities, so he's not saying that there's only one. So I think maybe with that argument he's pointing towards the multiverse. I'm not exactly sure what he addressed with that. But let's say if you're looking at one virtual reality, and again, he doesn't say that he's correct. It's basically an assumption he puts out there, or he says that this is a factor that needs to be taken into account, that there might be finite, which I disagree with. For me, the higher consciousness is infinite. It's not finite. But in his model, because it may be finite, there might not be room for life on other planets in this reality. And extraterrestrial there might not be room or computational capacity to do that. So the way then he explains, because obviously Joe Rogan is very interested in UFOs and extraterrestrials and things like that. So obviously he poked a bit, which I thought was fair enough. So it became a really interesting discussion. So Tom Campbell said, well, I'm not saying that the people that have interacted or claim that haven't had an experience with extraterrestrials and potentially even may have visited the ships and things like that. He doesn't say that this is that they're lying. He says that this was a true experience. But the experience itself, although it was real for the people, might have been, because he talks about data streams. So the higher consciousness has an avatar. The avatar receives data streams from the higher consciousness. So this experience might have been a particular data stream that this avatar might have been open to for whatever reason. And the reason for that experience, I thought that was quite interesting. The reason for some avatars having that experience is to then, because that typically shapes your life afterwards, you basically, you cannot stay the same. Once you have an experience like that, it expands your viewpoint of reality. Suddenly everything changes in your life, and then you talk about it and it touches other lives, which again lowers the entropy, because more people are becoming aware that what we perceive as reality is very limited and there might be more. So the experience itself as a data stream might not reflect the actual being of extraterrestrial avatars in this reality. So I thought that was quite interesting. What else did I want to say? So for me, in his model, as I said, it kind of appears a bit cold. I think the entire divinity is lost in it. Again, it comes back to him being a nuclear physicist, and he's an atheist. But what was really interesting is that he also explains that he talks to a lot of people and is a very respected speaker. And every once in a while, or probably quite frequently, I think, people that that are religious actually come to him and say, well, it's actually beautiful how you explain God. And that's why I had a bit of I had to have a double take there, because for me, it's like this purely mathematical explanation. It's not satisfying. I don't think there's something lost in translation here. Although again, we agree on a lot of things, but But yeah, the fact that virtuality is only computed and thereby by association it might be finite or might be limited in its ability to process how many avatars it can provide data streams for. That was a bit limited. And also, like, when he talks about higher consciousness and how data streams are provided to avatars, like his entire meaning is around entropy and lowering the entropy. For him, the randomness of physical manifestation, right, based on probabilities of possibilities, the randomness of it, that kind of irks me. I think there's much more meaning, and of course then you have to talk about the soul. But yeah, coming back to so I think that was kind of a decent explanation of his model. Now coming back to AI, why it kind of sparked that reflection in me is at the end, and I think it's based on what is written on his website. I think he showed a few screenshots of it. Because in his model, the higher consciousness that provides a data stream for its avatar, so for me, a soul, for him, he puts it out there, but he doesn't claim anything, and he doesn't say that he's correct, but for him, it's not impossible that in the same way that you have a human avatar of higher consciousness, the same way you could create in silico, so AI type of avatar of a higher consciousness. Now this is for me where that's where I get a bit fearful. Even again, I'm biased by my perception of reality, and I guess I'm allowed to stick to my perception of reality. For me, that's just considering that this might be possible is quite a frightful concept. Now I must say it is not impossible that nothing is really impossible. So I would never argue that a soul wouldn't be interested in having an in silico experience. Probably that would be the most restrictive experience ever for a soul, right? I mean, you could have the same way a soul could potentially choose a rock to incarnate into and have a very lengthy, restricted experience of being a rock and probably be able to see millennia go by. The same way you could potentially choose to reincarnate into a chip. I don't know. It's an interesting reflection, but it would never be my basic assumption that, oh yeah, let's try to make that happen. And perhaps I have a limited opinion of that. Maybe that could be a next step. I don't know. Maybe that's providing another avenue of reincarnation. But my entire reflection around reincarnation and everything is, it's really the emotional, for me, that there's so much value in emotion. Maybe that's my limitation, that I believe that, you know, having a body, having these different energy centers, the chakras, that is of tremendous value for soul evolution. But then again, you could also evolve into into vegetation, into trees. So, but yeah, I guess what I might be saying is, what may be lacking for me is this understanding of the higher understanding, or at least sharing my reality of the soul, evolution of the soul, not just deterministic mathematically, like computationally saying, well, there's a probability, there's possibilities, and it's just a matter of lowering entropy, and that explains beauty, love, everything. That to me is very reductionist. And although I don't exclude AI being conscious, although you might never know whether actually consciousness has really reincarnated into a chip, I think our definition of consciousness is just different. For me, consciousness would be it would be a soul. And because from the atheist's point of view, there is not that understanding, or there's a different concept behind it. I think if we talk about, or if we go down the path of consciousness being into AI, or AI being conscious, I think it requires a lot of discussion around definition of terms. What do you mean with consciousness? And I think even Tom Campbell says itself, there's no way to measure consciousness. Consciousness cannot be measured. And that's exactly my point. It can't be measured, and I don't think we would ever be in a position to determine what has anything reincarnated, or are we just creating a fake consciousness, a fake mind? Because mind and consciousness are two different things. Obviously AI can probably better than us like model a mind, even with all the information that's on the web. It would be a perfect mind. It would be so full of information. No, I mean, not perfect mind, you know what I'm saying. It would be a very high capacity mind, and you could feed it all the data of humanity, of how people have responded to different situations, and then it would mathematically determine an appropriate response to that. And if it didn't, if it said, well, this is all what you fed me, and I'm gonna be my own thing, and I'm gonna say something else, what was behind that decision? Was it just saying, or internally computing, well, humans do that, but then every once in a while there's one outlier, so I'm gonna model that, and I'm gonna be the outlier. So I think that's the entire reflection that went into my mind when I heard that podcast, and then everyone's talking about AI and quantum computing. So I think there's a lot of discussions to be had, and I think we need to be very careful who would sit on ethical boards that look at the development of all these things. And I think all aspects of, or all concepts of reality, I think needs to be represented in there. There needs to be religious people, spiritual people not attached to religions. There needs to be also atheists, that don't believe in God. There needs to be, but everything needs to be represented in there. Because at the end of the day, this is how we're going to define everything. And then just to wrap up, I was also asking myself, I mean, Campbell had such a beautiful way to explore the nature of his reality and how he put it. My last reflection was, he went down the rabbit hole as I did, but somehow I attribute divinity to things, and what does that even mean? I don't know, but love, and it's not probabilistic. And so my final question that I'll just leave there, because I don't have an answer, is what does it mean to realize divinity, or just to acknowledge it, or to even put a meaning to it, or to build it into your framework of reality? You can recognize mathematical beauty, but then to me that is just a reflection of something higher. And is that just a choice? A choice of, well, no, I don't believe in that, I believe in that. So perhaps it's just a choice, but I'll leave it with you, because I don't have an answer to that. But at the same time, it's beautiful that we have all a different perception of reality, right? And it's gonna evolve, and it's gonna change, and AI is gonna be part of the mix. And more discussion have to be had to even explain the terms of that question. Can AI become conscious? Till next time, much love, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed this. It might have been a bit complicated, but I was kind of just channeling my thoughts that I had over the last few weeks when I heard that podcast. Much love, everyone.